They called her a liability. They said a nurse with a bad leg had no business in a trauma center, that she was too slow to save a life when seconds counted. For 3 years, Isabella O'Connor swallowed their insults, scrubbed the floors, and stayed in the shadows, fighting a war of her own. But on a blood-soaked Tuesday, when the radio crackled with a desperate plea from a trapped Marine unit, the hospital administration ordered her to leave the room. They didn't know that to the men burning in the jungle, she wasn't the cripple. She was Angel 6. And when 4 CH-46 Sea Knights touched down on the tarmac, they didn't come for the doctors. They came for her. The humidity in the triage tent of the 71st Evacuation Hospital was a physical weight, a wet blanket of heat that trapped the smell of iodine, stale sweat, and drying blood. It was 1400 hours, the lull before the evening patrols usually brought in the day's grim harvest. Isabella "Izzy" O'Connor adjusted the brace on her left leg, wincing as the metal hinge pinched the scar tissue beneath her white stockings. It had been 5 years since the car accident on a slick highway in Ohio took her brother's life and shattered her tibia, leaving her with a permanent, rolling gait that some called a limp and others, less kind, called a hobble. "O'Connor, move it! You're blocking the corridor!" The voice was sharp, cutting through the humid air like a scalpel. Dr. Frederick Sterling stood at the nurse's station, tapping a gold pen against a metal clipboard. He was a man who prized efficiency over empathy, a surgeon who believed a hospital was a machine, and Izzy was a broken cog. "Sorry, Doctor," Izzy murmured, shifting her weight to her good leg and pulling the linen cart closer to the wall. "We have an inspection coming from Division HQ next week," Sterling said, not looking at her, his eyes scanning a patient chart. "I want you in the back, Izzy. Inventory and supply. The trauma bay needs to look active, dynamic. We can't have you shuffling around when the brass walks through. It sends the wrong message about our readiness." Izzy felt the familiar burn of humiliation rise up her neck, but she swallowed it down. It was the same song, different verse. Since arriving in country 6 months ago, she had been relegated to changing bedpans, organizing supply closets, and handling the low-priority cases, fevers, rashes, minor cuts. "I'm certified for trauma, Dr. Sterling," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "I was top of my class in triage protocols. If a mass casualty event occurs," Sterling interrupted, finally looking at her with a sneer of pity, "I need nurses who can run, O'Connor. Nurses who can pivot, lift, and sprint between gurneys. You have a good heart, I'm sure, but this is war. Physics doesn't care about your intentions. You are a liability." He ripped a page off the chart and thrust it at a passing orderly. "Go to supply. Count the morphine vials. Again." Izzy gripped the handle of the linen cart, her knuckles turning white. She didn't argue. She couldn't. Sterling was the chief of surgery. His word was law. She turned and began the slow, rhythmic walk down the hallway. Step, drag, step, drag. She could feel the eyes of the other nurses on her. Some looked away in sympathy, like young Jenny Miller, who always offered to carry Izzy's trays. Others, like the ambitious head nurse Ratchdesk figure, Beatrice, smirked. Izzy retreated to the supply closet, a suffocatingly small room stacked floor to ceiling with boxes of gauze and saline. She closed the door, shutting out the noise of the ward, and leaned her forehead against the cool metal of the shelving unit. They didn't understand. They saw the limp, but they didn't see the mind that worked faster than any of them. They didn't know that every night, while the others drank cheap beer at the O Club or slept, Izzy sat by the radio in the comms tent, bringing coffee to the signal officers. She listened to the chatter. She knew the grid coordinates. She knew the call signs of the units operating in the deep bush: Viper, Hammer, Cast Iron. She knew the terrain of the war better than the surgeons who stitched up the bodies. "Just count the vials," she whispered to herself, wiping a bead of sweat from her temple. "Just do the job." She was halfway through a box of sterile dressings when the overhead PA system crackled to life. The tone was different this time, urgent, shrill, terrified. "All hands, code black. All hands, code black. Incoming dust-offs. Heavy casualties. Estimated count 20+. ETA 3 minutes. Izzy dropped the clipboard. Code black meant the worst. It meant the facility would be overwhelmed. Every set of hands was needed, even hers. She burst out of the supply closet, her limp forgotten in the surge of adrenaline. The hallway was already chaotic. Orderlies were sprinting with stretchers. Nurses were priming IV lines. She reached the double doors of the trauma bay, just as Dr. Sterling was barking orders. "Get the blood bank on the line. I want 2 O-neg units at every station. Beatrice, take triage 1. Miller, triage 2. Izzy stepped forward, grabbing a pair of gloves from the dispenser. "Where do you want me, Doctor?" Sterling spun around, his face flushed. When he saw her, his eyes narrowed. "I told you to stay in supply, O'Connor." "It's a code black, sir. You need everyone." "I need capable bodies," Sterling shouted, the stress cracking his veneer of calm. "Get out of the way, O'Connor. You'll just trip over someone and kill a patient. Go man the phones at the front desk. Keep the civilians off the line. That's an order." The rejection hit her like a physical blow. Around her, the sound of approaching helicopters began to vibrate the walls. The whoop, whoop, whoop of rotors grew louder, a thundering heartbeat signaling the arrival of the maimed and dying. "Doctor, Go!" Sterling roared. Izzy froze. Then, slowly, she stripped off the gloves. She turned around, her face burning, and walked away. Step. Drag. Step. Drag. She made it to the reception desk just as the double doors burst open and the first bloody gurneys were wheeled in. The screaming started instantly. Men crying out for their mothers. Men screaming in shock. The chaotic shouting of medics reciting vitals. Izzy sat behind the high reception desk, her hands trembling. She felt useless. A decorative plant in a slaughterhouse. She picked up the ringing phone, answering robotically. 71st evacuation. Please hold. She watched from a distance as Dr. Sterling worked. He was fast, yes, but he was frantic. The unit that had been hit was bad. Marines. They were covered in mud and burns. Suddenly, a young corporal, a radio operator with a bandage wrapped around his head, stumbled away from the triage line. He was delirious, clutching a portable radio handset that was sparking and dead. I need the angel," the corporal mumbled, his eyes unfocused, scanning the room wildly. "Skipper says, find the angel." Dr. Sterling pushed the boy back onto a gurney. "Sedate him. He's in shock." "No." The corporal flailed, knocking a tray of instruments to the floor. "The frequency. She knows the frequency. Angel 6. Izzy's head snapped up. Angel 6. That wasn't a standard call sign. That was a ghost story. That was the handle she had used 3 weeks ago, late at night, when a freak monsoon had knocked out the main comms array, and she had illegally hopped on the ham radio to guide a lost platoon out of a minefield, using old topographic maps she had memorized. She had never told anyone. She thought she was just a voice in the dark. She stared at the delirious Marine. He was from that platoon, and he wasn't just asking for a nurse. He was asking for the only person who knew how to bring the rest of them home. The chaos in the trauma bay was absolute. The air was thick with the copper scent of blood and the acrid smoke clinging to the Marines' uniforms. Dr. Sterling was elbow deep in a thoracic cavity, shouting for clamps. Beatrice was frantically trying to start an IV on a soldier whose veins had collapsed from shock. Izzy stood up from the reception desk. Her leg throbbed, a dull, rhythmic ache that usually kept her seated, but the corporal's words echoed in her mind. Angel 6. She looked at the reception phone, then at the radio room down the hall. The radio operator, Sergeant Miller, was currently sprinting back and forth carrying blood bags, leaving the comms room unmanned. "Izzy, phone!" Beatrice screamed from across the room as the reception line lit up again. Izzy ignored her. She stepped out from behind the desk. She didn't walk with the tentative shuffle she used around Sterling. She moved with purpose. She grabbed a crutch leaning against the wall, one she usually felt too proud to use in public, and used it to propel herself forward, moving faster. She bypassed the trauma bay and ducked into the darkened comms room. The hum of the radio equipment was a comfort. She locked the door behind her. The big transceivers were buzzing with static. She sat down, donned the heavy headset, and flipped the switch to the emergency frequency, the ghost frequency she had monitored weeks ago. "This is Angel 6, she whispered into the mic, her voice steady. "Monitoring channel. Is anyone out there?" "Over." Static. Then a voice, strained, weak, but alive. "Angel, is that you? This is Reaper 2 actual. We are heavy contact. Grid 447. Taking fire. Can't move." Izzy grabbed a pen. "Reaper 2, I read you. What is your status? Over." "We have 7 critical. Skipper is down. We need extract. But the LZ is too hot. They won't send the birds. Said it's suicide." Izzy closed her eyes. The standard evac choppers, the dust-offs, were unarmed. They wouldn't fly into a hot zone with active enemy fire. They needed heavy support. They needed marine air. "Hold on, Reaper," Izzy said. "I'm going to get you a ride." She switched channels. She didn't dial the hospital dispatch. She dialed the frequency for the Marine Air Wing at Da Nang, a frequency she had memorized from a pilot she treated for food poisoning months ago. "Tower, this is an unauthorized transmission," a gruff voice crackled back. "Identify." "This is priority medical relay from the 71st, Izzy lied smoothly. "I have a recon unit, Reaper 2, pinned at grid 447. 7 critical casualties. They are requesting immediate extraction. Code Angel 6. There was a pause, a long, heavy silence. "Did you say Angel 6? The voice came back, skepticism replaced by a sudden, sharp intensity. "Affirmative. The boys on the ground are asking for it." "Stand by." Izzy waited. Sweat trickled down her back. If Sterling walked in now, she would be court-martialed. She was a nurse, not a forward air controller. She was breaking every protocol in the book. Suddenly, a new voice cut through, deep, authoritative. "This is Colonel Ironman Miller, Squadron Commander. Who is this?" "Just a voice in the dark, Colonel. Your men are dying at 447. They say the LZ is hot. They need the heavy haulers." "We've been trying to locate Reaper for 4 hours, Miller growled. "Their beacon is down. Are you sure about those coordinates?" "I guided them past the ravine 3 weeks ago, Colonel. I know where they go when they get in trouble. They're in the old French bunker line. Grid 447. Verify elevation 200. "If you're wrong, nurse, my pilots die." "I'm not wrong. But they will be dead in 10 minutes if you don't launch." A pause. "Launch the package. 4 birds. Full gunship escort. ETA 20 mics." Izzy slumped back in the chair, letting out a breath she didn't know she was holding. "Angel 6 to Reaper 2, she said softly. "The cavalry is coming. Keep your heads down." She stayed on the line for 10 minutes, keeping the wounded radio man on the other end talking, keeping him awake. She told him stories about the snow in Ohio, about her mother's apple pie. She was his lifeline. Then the door to the comms room rattled. "O'Connor, are you in there?" It was Sterling. He sounded furious. Izzy ripped the headset off just as the door lock gave way to a master key. Sterling stormed in, his surgical gown splattered with blood. "What the hell are you doing?" he screamed. "The phones are ringing off the hook. We need more saline from the back. And I find you playing with the radio? I was coordinating. I don't care if you were calling the president." Sterling grabbed her arm, his grip bruising. "You are derelict in your duty. Get out! Get out of my hospital. You're suspended, pending review. Go to the barracks and pack your things." Izzy stared at him. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by the crushing weight of her reality. She was just the limping nurse again. "Doctor, there are men. Out!" She grabbed her crutch. She didn't cry. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. She walked past him, head high, the thump drag of her gait echoing in the silent hallway. She went to the nurses' barracks, a tin-roofed hut 50 yards from the main building. She sat on her cot and began to fold her white uniform. It was over. She would be sent home in disgrace. 20 minutes passed. Then the sound came. It wasn't the whoop-whoop of the medical Hueys. It was a deeper, bone-shaking roar. The sound of twin-engine turbines, the sound of heavy metal. Izzy looked out the window. 4 massive CH-46C Knights, painted in dark marine green, were descending on the hospital helipad. They were so large they kicked up a hurricane of red dust that coated the windows. These weren't ambulance birds. These were assault transports. And they weren't landing at the designated drop-off zone. They were landing aggressively, right in the center of the compound, blowing the tents flaps wild. Izzy watched as the ramps lowered. But they didn't unload wounded immediately. Instead, a giant of a man, a full-bird colonel with a cigar clamped between his teeth and a sidearm on his hip, strode down the ramp. He was flanked by 4 armed MPs and 2 flight surgeons. He ignored the orderlies running up to the aircraft. He marched straight toward the main doors of the hospital, his face set in a mask of fury. Izzy's heart hammered. Colonel Miller. She watched through the window as Dr. Sterling ran out to meet him, waving his arms, likely complaining about the unauthorized landing. She couldn't hear what was said, but she saw the body language. Sterling pointed at the helicopter. The colonel slapped Sterling's hand away. The colonel shouted something. Sterling pointed toward the barracks, toward her barracks. The colonel turned. He looked straight at the tin hut where Izzy sat. He motioned to his men. The Marines started jogging toward her door. Izzy stood up, terrified. Had she made a mistake? Had she sent them to the wrong grid? Were they coming to arrest her for unauthorized use of military frequencies? The door to her barracks flew open. 2 Marines in full combat gear filled the frame. They were covered in grime, M16s, slung across their chests. "Isabella O'Connor?" one of them barked. "Yes," she whispered, gripping the bedpost. "Colonel wants you. Now." Am I under arrest?" The Marine frowned, confused. "Arrest? Ma'am, the Colonel said nobody touches the patients until Angel 6 is on the deck." Izzy blinked. "What?" "He said we don't trust the butchers inside. He said we only hand over to Angel 6. Please, ma'am, we have 18 criticals on those birds, and they won't let the doctors near them." Izzy grabbed her crutch. "Let's go." The walk from the barracks to the landing zone was less than 50 yards, but to Izzy it felt like crossing a minefield. The downdraft from the 4 CH-46C Knights was violent, whipping sand and debris against her face. Her leg brace clicked and locked with every step, a mechanical counterpoint to the thundering turbines. Ahead, a tableau of dysfunction was unfolding. Dr. Sterling was screaming, his face purple with rage, gesturing wildly at the lead helicopter. Beside him stood the hospital administrator, Mr. Galloway, a man who cared more about inventory spreadsheets than human lives. They were shouting at Colonel Iron Man Miller, who stood like a granite statue, his hand resting casually but threateningly on the holstered .45 at his hip. Behind the colonel, a wall of Marines stood guard at the base of the helicopter ramps. They weren't letting the hospital orderlies near the wounded. As Izzy approached, hobbling but determined, the colonel's eyes locked onto her. He raised a hand, and the screaming turbines seemed to drop in pitch as the pilots idled the engines. "Is this her?" Miller bellowed, his voice booming over the noise. Sterling spun around, seeing Izzy. He looked as if he'd swallowed a lemon. "This is ridiculous. Colonel, this woman is a suspended nurse with a mobility disability. She is not authorized to—" "I didn't ask you, Doctor," Miller cut him off, stepping forward. He towered over Izzy, a man etched from leather and iron, smelling of cigar smoke and aviation fuel. He looked down at her battered brace, then up to her eyes. "You're the one on the frequency. You're Angel 6. Izzy straightened her spine. She felt small, but she forced her voice to be steel. "I am, Colonel. Is Reaper 2 safe?" Miller cracked a grim smile. "Reaper is safe because of you. But they're torn up. We took heavy fire lifting off. I've got 18 critical, including the skipper. My boys are refusing to come off the bird for anyone but the voice that guided them in." "This is mutiny!" Sterling shrieked. "These men need immediate surgery. You are delaying care for a superstition." Miller turned on Sterling, his face hardening. "Doctor, my men spent 3 days in a hole thinking they were dead. The only thing that kept them fighting was that woman's voice. To them, she's not a nurse. She's their patron saint. If she says it's safe, they'll move. If not, we fly to the Navy ship offshore. Your choice." Sterling gaped. "You can't be serious. They won't survive the flight to the fleet." "Then I suggest you let her work," Miller growled. The colonel turned back to Izzy. He stepped aside and gestured to the open ramp of the lead helicopter. Inside, the red lights illuminated a nightmare. Bodies stacked on litters, blood soaking the floorboards, medics frantically pumping chests. "Your deck, Angel," Miller said softly. Izzy felt the world tilt. The fear vanished, replaced by the cold, hard clarity of triage. She looked at Sterling. "Dr. Sterling," she said, her voice projecting clearly. "I need 4 trauma teams. Now." Sterling bristled. "You do not give orders here, O'Connor." "Do it!" Miller roared, his hand tightening on his belt. Sterling flinched. He looked at the colonel, then at the dying men in the chopper, and finally at Izzy. The fight went out of him. He signaled the orderlies. "Go! Move! Do what she says!" Izzy didn't wait. She moved toward the ramp. The first Marine she saw was the one she had spoken to, the radio operator. He was strapped to a litter, his face a mask of dried blood and mud. His eyes were wide, terrified, darting around. "Angel!" he croaked. Izzy placed a hand on his shoulder. "I've got you, Corporal. You're home. We're going to fix you up." The corporal let out a sob and went limp, finally allowing the tension to leave his body. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay." Izzy turned to the chaos behind her. "Get them off. Triage right here on the tarmac. I want the criticals in Bay 1, walking wounded to the mess tent. Move, move, move!" She became a conductor of a symphony of pain. She ignored the burning in her leg. She moved from stretcher to stretcher as the Marines carried them down. "Sucking chest wound. Bay 1. Surgeon. Compound fracture. Stable. Bay 2. Abdominal evisceration. Prep for immediate ore." Sterling was forced to follow in her wake, taking the patients she assigned to him. For the first time in the history of the 71st Evacuation Hospital, the chief of surgery was taking cues from the nurse he tried to fire. But the real twist was yet to come. As the last stretcher was pulled from the third helicopter, a flight medic grabbed Izzy's arm. He was covered in blood that wasn't his own. "Mum, we have a problem with the VIP," the medic shouted. "VIP?" Izzy asked, wiping sweat from her eyes. "The platoon leader. Captain Vance is down, but he's got complications." Izzy looked at the stretcher. The captain was a large man, unconscious, pale as a sheet. But it wasn't the bullet wounds in his legs that drew her eye. It was his chest. Protruding from his thoracic cavity, just below the collarbone, was the tail fin of a 40mm grenade. It hadn't exploded. The tarmac went silent, the orderlies backing away. Even the hardened Marines took a step back. An unexploded ordnance, UXO, lodged in a patient, was a death sentence for everyone in the room. "Clear the area," Sterling screamed, backing away. "Call EOD. Do not bring him inside. Leave him there." "He's bleeding out, doctor," the medic yelled. "He has minutes." "I am not risking my hospital for one man," Sterling shouted, his self-preservation instinct overriding his oath. "Establish a perimeter. Nobody touches him." Izzy looked at the captain. He was dying. If they waited for explosive ordnance disposal, he would be dead before they arrived. If they moved him wrong, he would explode, killing everyone nearby. She looked at Sterling, who was retreating. She looked at Colonel Miller, who looked torn. He wanted to save his man, but he couldn't order his Marines to suicide. Izzy didn't think. She grabbed a pair of trauma shears and a clamp from a nearby tray. "O'Connor, get away from him," Sterling yelled. "That is an order." Izzy turned her back on Sterling. She looked at the flight medic. "Can you keep the ambu bag pumping gently? Very gently." The medic swallowed hard, sweat dripping from his nose. "Yes, Mom." "Then let's go to the far bunker," Izzy said calmly. "Just you and me." The far bunker was a sandbagged revetment usually used for ammo storage, located 50 yards away from the main hospital tents. It was the only place where, if the captain exploded, the blast would be contained. The sun was setting, casting long, bloody shadows across the camp. Inside the bunker, the light was dim. Izzy had 2 flashlights propped up on sandbags, focusing their beams on Captain Vance's chest. It was just Izzy and the young flight medic, a boy named Roberts. Everyone else, Sterling, the nurses, even Colonel Miller, was behind the blast wall, 50 yards away. They were watching through binoculars. "Okay, Roberts," Izzy whispered. The air was thick with the smell of wet earth and iron. "I need you to keep his breathing steady. If he bucks or coughs, the diaphragm moves. If the diaphragm moves, the grenade shifts. If the grenade shifts, we go boom," Roberts finished, his voice trembling. "Exactly. So don't let him wake up." Izzy inspected the wound. The grenade had entered at an angle, smashing the clavicle and lodging near the chaotic mix of vessels above the heart. It was a miracle it hadn't detonated on impact. The fuse was likely damaged, but it was still live. She couldn't operate like a surgeon. She didn't have the tools to repair the vessels. Her goal wasn't to fix him. It was to remove the bomb, so Sterling would agree to operate. She picked up the scalpel. Her hands, usually so steady, felt heavy. She took a deep breath. She thought of her brother, trapped in the wreck of his car, the help arriving too late. Not this time. "Making the incision," she said, for the benefit of nobody but God. She cut the skin around the metal fin. The captain groaned deep in his throat. "Bolus of morphine," Izzy hissed. "Keep him under." Roberts injected the line. The captain settled. Izzy worked with agonizing slowness. She had to widen the wound to free the warhead without scraping the metal against the shattered bone. Scrape, spark, boom. Outside, the entire base was silent. Hundreds of people were holding their breath. Izzy felt a trickle of sweat run into her eye. She couldn't wipe it. She blinked rapidly, the salt stinging, blurring her vision for a split second. She paused. Focus. You are Angel 6. You guide them home. She felt the metal give slightly. It was loose. I've got the tail, she whispered. I'm going to slide it out. Roberts, on my count of 3, stop squeezing the bag. I need his chest perfectly still. Copy, Roberts squeaked. 1, 2, 3. Roberts stopped. The captain's chest froze in the lull between breaths. Izzy gripped the slippery metal of the grenade tail with her gloved fingers. She pulled. It slid a millimeter. Then it caught on a fragment of bone. She froze. If she pulled harder, it might trigger the impact fuse. If she twisted, it might grind. She closed her eyes for a heartbeat, visualizing the anatomy. She needed to depress the tissue underneath. I need a third hand, she muttered. She didn't have one, but she had a bad leg. In a move that would have made a physical therapist scream, Izzy shifted her weight, hooking the tip of her heavy walking crutch, which she had leaned against the sandbag, with her foot. She brought the rubber tip of the crutch up, balancing on her one good leg, and used the crutch handle to gently press down on the captain's shoulder, creating just enough leverage to open the wound a fraction wider. It was a balancing act of impossible precariousness, a crippled nurse balancing on one leg, using a crutch as a surgical retractor, pulling a live bomb out of a man's chest. She pulled again. Sluck. The sound was wet and sickening. The grenade slid free, dripping with dark blood. Izzy didn't breathe. She held the metal egg in the air, her hand trembling now that the motion was done. Bag him, she gasped. Get his heart rate up. Robert squeezed the bag. The captain's chest rose. Izzy turned and walked. Did not run, walked to the ammo box filled with sand she had prepared in the corner. She gently placed the grenade inside and closed the lid. Only then did her legs give out. She collapsed onto the dirt floor, her bad leg screaming in protest, her scrub top soaked through with sweat. Clear! Roberts yelled, his voice cracking. It's clear! He's clean! A cheer went up from behind the blast wall that sounded like a touchdown at the Super Bowl. Moments later, the team rushed in. But it wasn't Sterling leading the pack. It was Colonel Miller. He didn't look at the captain. He looked at Izzy, who was trying to pull herself up using the sandbags. Miller holstered his weapon and walked over. He didn't offer a hand. He offered a salute. A sharp, crisp, military salute. You got ice water in your veins, Angel, Miller said, his voice gruff with emotion. Now let's get my boy to the butcher's. As the orderlies rushed Captain Vance to the sterile operating theatre, where Sterling was now waiting, looking pale and shamed, Izzy tried to stand. But the adrenaline crash was too hard. The world spun grey. She felt herself tipping forward. The last thing she felt was Colonel Miller catching her before she hit the ground, lifting her as easily as a child. Medic! Miller roared. I need a gurney for the Angel, now! Izzy woke up to the sound of rain drumming on a tin roof. It was a soft, rhythmic sound, unlike the chaos of the rotors. She was in a bed, a real bed with clean sheets, not a cot. She blinked her eyes open. She was in the VIP recovery room. The air conditioning was humming. She tried to sit up, but a hand gently pushed her back down. Easy, O'Connor. You've been out for 14 hours. It was Dr. Sterling. Izzy flinched, expecting a reprimand, expecting to be told she was fired for endangering hospital personnel, expecting the lecture about the grenade. She looked at him. Sterling looked tired. He was sitting in a metal chair beside her bed, still wearing his scrubs, though he had changed the bloody gown. He held a cup of coffee in both hands, staring into the black liquid. The captain? Izzy asked, her voice raspy. He made it. Sterling said quietly. I repaired the subclavian artery. It was a mess, but thanks to the fact that he didn't explode, I was able to work. That's good, Izzy whispered. And the others? All survived the night, even the ones with the burns. We're shipping them to Japan tomorrow. Sterling took a sip of coffee, then set the cup down. He looked at Izzy, really looked at her, for the first time since she had arrived at the 71st. He looked at her not as a liability, but as a puzzle he had failed to solve. I wrote your discharge papers yesterday morning, Sterling said. I listed physical incapacity as the reason. Izzy looked away. I know. I'll pack my things as soon as I can stand up. I tore them up, Sterling said. Izzy looked back, surprised. Sterling sighed, rubbing his temples. I have been a surgeon for 20 years, O'Connor. I operate on logic. Logic dictates that a nurse who cannot run cannot respond to a code. Logic dictates that you are a weak link. He paused, leaning forward. But logic didn't land 4 helicopters in a gale. Logic didn't pull a 40mm grenade out of a thorax with a crutch and a prayer. I watched you from the blast wall. I saw what you did. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, crumpled piece of paper, the note she had scribbled coordinates on for the radio operator weeks ago. The corporal had kept it in his pocket. The corporal gave me this. He told me you stayed on the line with him for 6 hours that night. He said you told him about Ohio. Sterling's voice cracked slightly. He said he would have let go if you hadn't kept talking. Sterling stood up. He looked uncomfortable, a man unused to apologizing. You are not a liability, Isabella. You are something else, something we need. He cleared his throat, regaining his professional composure. I am reinstating you, effective immediately, and I am appointing you charge nurse for triage operations. You don't need to run gurneys. You need to tell the runners where to go, because apparently you see things I miss. Izzy felt tears prick her eyes. It wasn't just the promotion. It was the acknowledgement. Thank you, Doctor. Don't thank me yet, Sterling said, walking to the door. Colonel Miller is outside, and he's brought half the Marine Corps with him. They want to see you. I told them you needed rest, but, well, they have guns. Sterling opened the door. The hallway wasn't empty. It was lined, wall to wall, with Marines. Some were bandaged, leaning on crutches. Some were dirty, fresh from the field. At the front was Colonel Miller, holding a bouquet of wildflowers that looked like they had been ripped out of the jungle floor by hand. But before Miller could step in, a man in a suit pushed past him. A man Izzy had never seen before, flanked by 2 MPs with CID, Criminal Investigation Division, armbands. Isabella O'Connor? The suit asked, his voice cold. Yes? Izzy sat up, clutching the sheet. I'm Special Agent Schrader, Army CID. I'm afraid I have to ask you to come with us. Sterling stepped in front of the door. She is a patient. What is this about? Schrader adjusted his tie. This is about the unauthorized use of restricted military communication frequencies, impersonating an officer to authorize an airstrike, and endangerment of military assets. We have a recording of her identifying herself as Angel 6 and ordering a squadron launch without command approval. Schrader produced a pair of handcuffs. Miss O'Connor, you are under arrest for treason. The room went deadly silent. The word treason hung in the air like smoke. Agent Schrader moved to cuff Izzy, but before the metal could touch her wrist, a massive hand clamped down on Schrader's forearm. It wasn't Dr. Sterling. It was Colonel Miller. Remove your hand from my nurse, Agent, Miller said, his voice dropping to a subterranean growl. Schrader looked up at the colonel, sweating but defiant. Colonel Miller, This is a CID matter. This civilian accessed a classified tactical frequency, impersonated a forward air controller, and ordered the deployment of $4 million in military aircraft. That is a court-martial offense. She saved 20 Marines, Miller said, tightening his grip, including my best platoon commander. Intent is irrelevant, Schrader snapped, wincing as his arm was squeezed. The law is the law. If civilians start calling in airstrikes, we lose command and control. She comes with me to Saigon for interrogation. You want to take her? Miller released Schrader's arm with a shove. He stepped back and turned to the open door. Then you better bring a tank. Miller whistled. Instantly, the corridor filled with noise. The Marines who had been lining the hallway stepped into the room. They weren't just standing there. They were blocking the exit. They crossed their arms, creating a wall of olive drab and muscle. This is obstruction of justice, Schrader squeaked, reaching for his radio. No, Miller said, lighting a fresh cigar right there in the recovery room. This is a jurisdictional dispute. You say she's a civilian criminal. I say she's a Marine asset. And until the general rules on it, she stays under my protection. Izzy sat frozen in bed, her heart pounding. She looked at the Marines. One of them, a young private with his arm in a sling, winked at her. Colonel, Izzy said, her voice trembling, I don't want to cause trouble. I did break the rules. Miller turned to her, his expression softening. Izzy, there are rules and there is duty. You did your duty. Now let me do mine. The standoff lasted for 3 hours. The hospital became a fortress. CID agents were parked outside in sedans, while Marine MPs guarded every entrance. Dr. Sterling, to his credit, stood by Izzy's side the entire time, refusing to let the agents interview her without legal counsel. Finally, a helicopter landed. Not a medical dust-off, and not a Marine transport. A sleek, polished Huey with the stars of a major general on the nose. General Davidson, the theater commander for the region, strode into the hospital. He was a sharp-featured man with eyes like flint. He walked past the CID agents, past the Marines, and into Izzy's room. Schrader jumped to attention. General, I am attempting to apprehend a suspect who— Quiet, Schrader, Davidson said, not raising his voice. He looked at Izzy. She tried to sit up straight, despite the pain in her leg. So, the general said, studying her. You're the one they're calling Angel 6. Yes, sir, Izzy whispered. Colonel Miller tells me you memorized the topographic maps of the Ashau Valley. Is that true? I study them, sir. At night, when the ward is quiet. Why? Because the boys don't know where they are half the time, sir, Izzy said, finding her courage. The jungle is thick. Their radios fail. I figured if I knew the terrain, I could help them find the high ground if they got lost. The general raised an eyebrow. He turned to Schrader. Agent, you want to charge her with unauthorized communication? Yes, sir. It's a clear violation of Article 134. And what is the penalty? Imprisonment, sir. General Davidson nodded slowly. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a file. It is a violation. However, the Marine Corps has a shortage of qualified forward air controllers. We lost 3 last week. He took a pen from his pocket and scribbled on a document. As of this morning, Isabella O'Connor is hereby granted a field commission as an honorary warrant officer in the United States Marine Corps Reserve, with specific clearance for tactical communication relay. Schrader's jaw dropped. General, you can't be serious. You're deputizing her? I'm solving your legal problem, Agent, Davidson said dryly. She can't be a civilian impersonating an officer if she is an officer. Now get out of my hospital. Schrader turned red, sputtered, and stormed out of the room, his agents trailing behind him. The room erupted. The Marines cheered. Dr. Sterling actually smiled, but the general raised a hand. Silence fell. "Don't get too excited, O'Connor," Davidson said sternly. "You're not going to jail, but you're not going back to changing bedpans either. Colonel Miller tells me our comms network is a mess. You seem to have a knack for it. We're setting up a dedicated medical relay coordination center. You're going to run it." Izzy stared at him. "Me, sir?" "You. And fix that leg, officer. We have work to do." 3 months had passed since the trial that wasn't a trial, and the monsoon season had descended upon the Central Highlands with a vengeance. The rain didn't just fall, it hammered the earth, turning the red clay of the base into a sucking quagmire that swallowed jeep tires and boots alike. But up on the roof of the 71st Evacuation Hospital, inside the newly constructed comms bunker, known as the Angel's Nest, the air was dry, cool, and smelled of ozone and stale coffee. Isabella O'Connor sat in the center of this storm, bathed in the red glow of tactical lights. She looked nothing like the timid nurse who had shuffled through the corridors avoiding Dr. Sterling's gaze. The white starch of her nursing dress was gone, replaced by a set of tailored jungle fatigues that had been gifted to her by a recon unit. On her feet, she wore jungle boots, customized with a zipper on the left side to accommodate the thick, black-painted steel brace that still encased her leg. The limp was still there. The pain was a constant, gnawing companion that flared with the barometric pressure drops, but she no longer dragged the leg. She planted it. She moved around the comms room, not with speed, but with an economy of motion that commanded respect. The room itself was a testament to her new reality. It was a nerve center. The walls were plastered with acetate-covered topographic maps, marked up in grease pencil, with the ever-shifting lines of the war. Arrows, circles, and airs in blue and red denoted friendly patrols, suspected enemy movements, and hot LZs. "Angel 6, this is Dustoff 3-1, a voice crackled over the main transceiver. "We are 10 mics out from the barn. We have 4 litters, 2 ambulatory. 1 critical head wound. Over." Izzy didn't look up from the map table where she was measuring distances with a protractor. She pressed the transmit key on her desk microphone without hesitation. "Dustoff 3-1, copy. You have priority clearance to Pad Alpha. Be advised, winds are gusting 20 knots from the southeast. Watch the drift on approach. Triage is prepped and waiting. Over." "Roger that, Angel. 3-1 out." She spun her chair to the young private sitting at the secondary radio console. Private first class. Henderson was 19, fresh from the States, and looked at Izzy with a mixture of terror and awe. "Henderson, get on the horn to the OR," Izzy ordered, her voice calm, but cutting through the hum of the equipment. "Tell Dr. Sterling the head wound is inbound. He needs to have the neuro kit open and ready. I don't want them scrambling for a drill while the patient is bleeding on the table." "Yes, ma'am." Henderson scrambled to the intercom. Izzy took a sip of lukewarm black coffee from a tin mug. She rubbed her eyes. She had been on shift for 16 hours. There was a shortage of qualified controllers, and she refused to let an untrained rookie handle the night shift, especially during the monsoon when flight conditions were treacherous. The door to the nest opened, letting in a gust of humid, rainy air. Dr. Frederick Sterling stepped inside, shaking water from his poncho. He looked older than he had 3 months ago, the lines around his eyes etched deeper by the endless procession of casualties, but his posture was less rigid. "You're still here," Sterling observed, not as a criticism, but as a statement of fact. "The rain's bad, Fred," Izzy replied, not turning from the boards. "This is down to half a mile. If the birds get lost tonight, they don't come back." Sterling walked over and placed a fresh cup of steaming coffee on her desk, taking the cold one away. It was a small ritual, a peace offering that had become a daily occurrence. "Ore is prepped," Sterling said, leaning against the map table. "We cleared Bay 2 for the head wound. You called it right on the triage priority earlier with the chest case. If we'd waited 5 more minutes, he would have coded." "He sounded gurgly on the radio." Izzy shrugged. "Tension pneumothorax. I could hear it in the background noise. Had the medic needle him before they even lifted off?" Sterling shook his head, a faint smile playing on his lips. "You diagnose over the radio now. You're terrifying, O'Connor." "I'm efficient, Doctor. You taught me that." They shared a look, a mutual acknowledgement of the strange path that had brought them here. The animosity was dead, buried under the weight of shared survival. Sterling had come to rely on her not just as a nurse, but as the hospital's early warning system. She was the eyes and ears. He was the hands. "Go get some sleep, Izzy," Sterling said softly. "Henderson can handle the midnight check-ins. You're limping worse than usual." "I'm fine," she said automatically. "You're stubborn, and you're—" He was cut off by the sudden, shrieking alarm of the emergency frequency. It wasn't the standard call tone. It was the Mayday squawk. The atmosphere in the room shattered instantly. Henderson froze. Izzy spun back to the console, snatching the headset. "Mayday! Mayday! Mayday! This is Viper 6 Actual. We are overrun. I repeat, we are overrun. Grid is—" The voice was screaming, barely audible over the roar of automatic weapons fire and explosions. Izzy's hand clamped onto the mic. Her eyes snapped to the map. Viper 6. That was Captain Vance's new unit, the man she had saved from the grenade. They were deep in the A Shao Valley, hunting a supply line. "Viper 6, this is Angel 6. I have you loud and clear. Calm down. Give me your grid. Over. Angel, they're everywhere. We're pinned against the river. Grid 729-441. We need fire support. We need everything." Izzy looked at the map. Grid 729-441 was a nightmare, a steep valley floor surrounded by high ridges, a kill box, and with this weather, air support was nearly impossible. "Henderson," she barked, "get the artillery battery at Firebase Gloria on the line. Fire mission, immediate suppression. Grid 729-441, danger close." "Danger close?" Henderson stammered. "Ma'am, that's right on top of them." "Do it!" she yelled. She switched frequencies, dialing in the air wing. "Red Crown, this is Angel 6. I have a unit in extremis at the A Shao River Bend. I need fast movers. What do you have on station?" "Angel 6, this is Red Crown," the controller replied, sounding regretful. "Negative on fast movers. The ceiling is too low. We can't see the ground. We can't drop without hitting the friendlies." Izzy slammed her fist on the desk. She looked at the map again. The artillery could buy them time, but it wouldn't get them out. They needed extraction. But who would fly into a monsoon valley under fire? She knew who. She switched to a UHF frequency. "Iron Man, this is Angel 6. Are you monitoring?" There was a pause, then the deep, familiar growl of Colonel Miller. "I'm here, Angel. I hear 'em. They're trapped, Colonel. Fast movers can't get under the clouds. They need a pickup. It's a swimming pool out there, Angel. This is 0. "I can guide you," Izzy said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming the anchor she knew he needed. "I have the terrain map. I know the approach. If you fly the river nap of the Earth, you can pop up right over the LZ. I'll talk you in." A long silence stretched over the airwaves. Sterling watched her, holding his breath. Henderson was wide-eyed. "You better be right, Angel," Miller finally said. "Launching flight of 2. Spooky 1 and Spooky 2. We're coming out." For the next 20 minutes, the room was a masterclass in chaos management. Izzy O'Connor, the woman who had been told to stay in the supply closet, became the conductor of a war. She had the artillery walking shells in a protective curtain around the trapped Marines. She had the medical teams prepping for mass casualties. And she had Colonel Miller's helicopters flying blind through a storm, guided only by her voice and her memory of a topographic map. Turn left 10 degrees, Iron Man. There's a ridgeline at elevation 300 coming up. Okay, steady. You should see the river bend in 5, 4, 3. Visual, Miller shouted over the radio. I see the river. We are turning on final. Gunners, light 'em up! The sound of miniguns roared through the radio speaker, a buzz-saw of salvation. We are on the deck. Marines are loading. Go, go, go! Izzy closed her eyes, visualizing the chaotic scene miles away. She could almost feel the wind from the rotors. Angel 6, this is Iron Man. We are wheels up. We have the package. All souls aboard. We're coming home. The cheer that went up in the comms room was deafening. Henderson threw his headset on the desk and high-fived the air. Even Sterling let out a breathy laugh, slumping against the wall. Izzy didn't cheer. She simply slumped back in her chair, the adrenaline draining away, leaving her leg throbbing and her hands shaking. She took a deep, shuddering breath. Good work, Angel. Miller's voice came over the radio, softer now. Drinks are on me when we touch down. Just bring them home safe, Colonel, she whispered. Angel 6 out. She stood up, needing to move, needing to work the cramp out of her leg. She walked to the large window that overlooked the helipad. The rain was still lashing down, but through the gloom, she saw the landing lights of the 2 Sea Knights cutting through the darkness. As the lead chopper flared for landing, the searchlight swept across the wet tarmac. It illuminated the nose of the aircraft. Izzy paused. She had seen the helicopters 100 times, but she hadn't noticed the fresh paint on Miller's lead bird until now. There, painted in stark white against the dark green fuselage, was nose art. It wasn't the usual pin-up girl or grim reaper. It was a painting of a woman in fatigue trousers and a t-shirt, wearing a headset. She was leaning on a crutch, but she looked like a titan, holding a lightning bolt in one hand and a radio handset in the other. Underneath, in bold, jagged letters, it read, Angel 6. Izzy pressed her hand against the cold glass. Tears, hot and unbidden, blurred her vision. Dr. Sterling stepped up beside her. He looked at the painting, then at her. They don't paint nurses on assault helicopters, Izzy, he said quietly. They paint legends. Izzy wiped her eyes and straightened her back. She adjusted her brace, feeling the metal click into place. I'm not a legend, Fred, she said, turning back to the radio as it began to crackle with the next call for help. I'm just the nurse who didn't stay back. She sat down, keyed the mic, and spoke into the dark. This is Angel 6. Send your traffic. Isabella O'Connor served in Vietnam for 2 more years. She never fired a weapon, but she is credited with saving over 200 lives, not with a scalpel, but with a radio. She proved that heroism isn't about physical perfection. It's about the will to act when everyone else freezes. The Angel 6 frequency became a legend, a channel where the impossible happened because one woman refused to accept that she was useless. If this story moved you, if you believe that true heroes come in all forms, please hit that like button. It helps us share these forgotten stories with the world. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a tale of courage. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that their weakness might just be their greatest strength. Who is the angel in your life? Let us know in the comments below.